We, here at Past the Pumpkin's Glow, just want to say thank you for all the new subscribers and those that have been hanging out with us this entire time. New or old, we really appreciate it. Before we dive into today's eerie adventure, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out on any of our haunting stories. Welcome back to Past the Pumpkin's Glow. Let's dive right into our stories tonight. Before I ever set foot in my boyfriend's house, whispers of its eerie past had reached me. It was known that a previous tenant had dabbled extensively in the occult, using tarot cards, Ouija boards, and even voodoo dolls. Despite the unsettling history, I didn't anticipate the chilling experiences that awaited me there. My boyfriend lived with his sister, and during my visits, I often babysat his nieces. We spent much of our time in the mostly finished but still partly dark and dank basement. It was a space that felt cooler and more shadow-laden than the rest of the house, imbuing an easy atmosphere to our play area. One particular day, I found myself alone in the basement bathroom, a cramped space barely large enough for a stand-up shower, a tiny pedestal sink, and a single bulb hanging over the mirror. While adjusting my hair, a reflection caught my eye. There, peeking around the shower curtain, was a figure with an unnaturally long neck wearing a shower cap. The face bore an enormously large grin that seemed both impossible and terrifying. Our eyes met in the mirror, a moment of silent confrontation. Without letting on that I had noticed him, I calmly exited the bathroom, scooped up the niece I was babysitting, and hurried upstairs to the safety of the brighter, lived-in parts of the house. Later, when my ex-boyfriend got home, I mentioned the odd occurrence to him. Careful not to lead his responses, I simply asked if he had ever noticed anything unusual in the house. To my horror, he described seeing a man in a shower cap with similar grotesque features, confirming that my encounter wasn't a product of my imagination. He also shared a rumor that the occult-obsessed previous tenant had spoken of a sealed room, hidden behind the basement cement walls, hinting at dark rituals that might have invited something malevolent into the home, or someone might actually be living behind there. That wasn't the only odd occurrence to the house. As time went on, the house seemed to grow more restless. Objects would inexplicably fly off walls, and shadows moved just beyond the corner of our eyes. This unexplained phenomena, combined with the repeated sightings of the man in the shower cap, led me to believe that we were dealing with a ghost or a demon, a lingering presence tied to the house's dark past. And I know what you're thinking, a man in a shower cap, how scary can that be? But when it doesn't belong there, anything is terrifying. I never saw the map again, but I'm not positive if it was something I was supposed to see or not. Was it meant for somebody else? Or was I at the right place at the wrong time? Either way, I still remember it to this day. I'm happily married now, but that image still haunts me, no matter how much I try to reflect on that day with my brothers or anyone I'd speak to about it. Something wasn't right, and I could still feel that. When I signed the lease for the small studio apartment at the edge of downtown, the deal felt almost too good to be true. The landlord, Mr. Henley, was eager to seal the agreement, his demeanor slightly off-putting in its urgency. The building, an aged structure with weathered brick and a distinctive charm, held a secretive air, much like its caretaker. The apartment, nestled on the third floor, was charming with scuffed hardwood floors and ample windows that bathed the room in natural light, giving it a warm, inviting feel. The initial days passed, and the usual whirl of unpacking and arranging, the space slowly transforming into a semblance of home. However, as the novelty began to wane, a series of disturbances crept in, disrupting the peace. It began with unexplainable noises during the night, soft thumps and the sound of something being dragged across the floor. These sounds, emerging from the walls, would abruptly stop whenever I strained to locate their source. Concerned, I approached Mr. Henley. His explanation was dismissive, attributing the noises to the quote-unquote building's age. Well, old structures like these tend to make noise, you know, he remarked casually, avoiding my gaze. His indifference did little to assuage my unease. Driven by my curiosity and anxiety, I decided to investigate. The noises seemed mostly pronounced around the hall or closet. Inside, I discovered that one of the back panels was oddly colder to the touch and loosely fitted. Compelled by my mix of dread and curiosity, I pried it open, revealing a concealed, narrow space behind it. Stepping into this hidden alcove, with only a flashlight for company, I was met with an unsettling sight. Walls plastered with old photographs and newspaper clippings. The photographs mostly depicted various residents of the building, taken without their notice, focusing ominously on the windows and doors. The newspaper clippings were more disturbing, detailing reports of individuals who had vanished, all former tenants of this varied building. A surge of horror rushed through me as I realized the implication of these findings. I hastily retreated to my apartment, my mind racing with the grim discovery. The following morning, after a night of restless vigilance, I confronted Mr. Henley. His demeanor shifted from dismissive to defensive, his eyes darting nervously as he insisted that I had misunderstood what I had stumbled upon. Unconvinced and shaken, I contacted the police. Reluctantly, the officers agreed to examine the concealed room. What they uncovered was chilling. Beyond the invasive photos and clippings, they found personal items belonging to the missing tenants. The evidence was undeniable and sinister. The ensuing investigation revealed Mr. Henley's dark obsession. As a longtime caretaker, he had exploited his access to monitor and ultimately target certain tenants, leading to their disappearances. His arrest followed, unraveling decades of secrets the building had harbored. Obviously, this whole experience tainted my experience inside the apartment. I vacated as soon as possible, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The building, now under new ownership, was thoroughly renovated with enhanced security to safeguard its future residents. I can't help but stop and think, how many nights was he behind there? Did I only hear the nights that he was making noises, or was he there every night? Was he ever in my room? Reflecting back to the late 80s, there are pieces of my childhood that seem as vivid as yesterday and others that blur into fragments of half-remembered moments. One such weekend remains etched in my memory, a sleepover with my friend Brian that shifted from an adventure to something much darker. Brian and I had planned that sleepover for weeks. It was supposed to be a typical weekend of pizza, video games, and movies. Our prized possession was a movie Brian brought over in a blockbuster case, a rated R film that made us feel like total badasses just for holding it. My parents were unexpectedly called away due to some slight emergency, the details of which I never quite caught. They debated briefly, but decided to leave us alone for a short while, confident we'd be fine just watching TV. We had every intention of watching the movie in my room, but the allure of the big TV in the living room was too much to resist. With a conspiratorial grin, Brian handed me the tape to pop into the VCR. It wasn't labeled, and Brian seemed a bit disappointed, mentioning he might have grabbed the wrong one from the stack next to his family's VCR. Shrugging it off, we decided to see what mystery movie we'd ended up with. The screen flickered with static and tracking lines as I fumbled with the tracking control. What appeared next seemed innocuous at first. A home video, a woman tinkering with the camera, zooming in and out while narrating the buttons she was pressing. Brian's dad's voice floated in from off-screen, his words muffled but clearly joking from the woman's chuckling response. But within seconds, the atmosphere in the room changed. Brian's face fell into a mask of embarrassment and then concern as he suggested we turn it off. Before I could react, the scene cut abruptly to another shot from the same camera. It was dimly lit, the camera angle direct and unforgiving. A woman's screams filled the room, her pleas desperate, her voice eerily similar to the one that had just been laughing. Brian leaped up, his movements hurried and shaky as he stopped the tape and ejected it from the VCR. He grabbed the cassette, his hands trembling, and muttered that these were his dad's tapes. meant to never leave the house. His worry seemed focused more on the consequences of disobedience than the disturbing content we had just glimpsed. I tried to act cool, to brush it off as some weird adult thing, suggesting maybe all parents had strange tapes. I didn't believe my own words. Deep down, I felt a chilling realization that what we saw was something sinister, something far beyond a simple home movie mistake. The rest of the weekend passed quietly. When Sunday came and my parents drove Brian home, the air was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Once he was out of the car, I spilled everything to my parents. Their concern was immediate. They called the authorities for a wellness check on Brian's family. I never saw Brian again after that weekend. Life moved on, filled with school activities and new friends, as my parents gently steered me away from dwelling on those events. It wasn't until years later, driven by a haunting curiosity, that I looked up Brian's family. His dad had been arrested, charged with multiple counts of life imprisonment for the murders of several women. The evidence found included tapes, some labeled as mere voyeurism, others as undeniable proof of his gruesome crimes. That weekend is a part of my past that, despite the distance of years, occasionally comes back to me in the quiet of night, a reminder of innocence lost far too soon. Years later, driven by a need to understand more about those events, I brought up the subject with my parents. They seemed uneasy, quickly changing the topic. I was annoyed and didn't push, but later that day, my dad called me. He explained he wanted to protect my mom from the conversation because my mother was one of the women Brian's dad had spied on. He confessed that the peeping was how he chose his victims, looking for those he considered worthy enough to be his targets. This revelation cast a darker shadow over those childhood memories, intertwining my family's history with a horror I had never fully understood. The drive to Blackwood Cottage was supposed to be a peaceful retreat from the city's chaos. Nestled deep in the forest, it promised solitude and serenity. However, as I approached the secluded house, a sense of unease began to settle over me, a premonition that this weekend would not be the quiet escape I had envisioned. The cottage itself was quaint with creaking wood floors and large windows that offered expansive views of the dense woods surrounding it. My first evening passed uneventfully, and I managed to dismiss the creeping dread as city-born paranoia. However, that night the tranquility was shattered by the sound of breaking glass downstairs. Heart pounding, I crept to the staircase and saw shadows moving through the broken window. Before I could retreat, 3 figures burst into the room, their faces masked, their intentions clear as they brandished weapons and demanded my silence. The leader, a tall, burly man with a gruff voice, declared that they were hiding out until morning and that I was to remain quiet if I valued my safety. Trapped, I had no choice but to comply, hoping for a chance to escape. As hours ticked by, the intruders made themselves at home, eating my food and discussing their next moves in hushed tones. I gleaned from their conversation that they were fugitives on the run from a failed heist, and Blackwood Cottage was their temporary hideout. Dawn was approaching when the tension among them reached a peak. Disagreements about their plan erupted into heated arguments. Seizing the moment, I sneaked my phone from the couch and dialed 911, whispering my situation and location to the dispatcher. The police arrived swiftly, their sirens wailing through the early morning stillness. Caught off guard, the intruders were quickly subdued and arrested. As the officers escorted them out, the leader locked eyes with me, his look one of betrayed fury. In the aftermath, as investigators swarmed the cottage and detectives took my statement, the reality of my ordeal began to sink in. I was safe, but the trauma of that night lingered, casting a long shadow over what had once been my peaceful refuge. On an overcast afternoon, I found myself wandering aimlessly around the house. As I thumbed through dusty pages of photographs, a sudden movement outside of the front window caught my eye. There, staring intently into the house, was a man. His face was unsettlingly familiar, yet I couldn't place where I had seen him before. His eyes, cold and calculating, seemed to pierce through the glass, studying me. His features were sharp, with a pronounced scar running down his left cheek, adding to his menacing demeanor. This sight sent a chill through me. Backing away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, I heard a series of loud knocks coming from the basement door. It was an aggressive rapping, insistent and urgent, as if demanding to be heard. The basement had no locks. It was just a flimsy wooden door that I always thought could barely keep out the cold, let alone an intruder. Panic set in as I heard simultaneous knocking on both the front and back doors. It was as if these unseen assailants were communicating, cornering me. Who are these people? What do they want? I muttered to myself, overwhelmed with fear. Fumbling with the kitchen wall phone, I dialed my neighbor's number with trembling hands. When they answered, I was already in tears, barely managing to explain that people were trying to break into my house. My neighbor quickly glanced outside but saw no signs of disturbance, which only deepened the mystery. We hung up and they dialed 911 on my behalf. As I stepped away from the phone, my foot slipped in something. I looked down to find a growing pool of blood forming an eerie outline of two figures laying on the ground. My breath caught in my throat as I stared in horror. Then, in an instant, the scene dissolved. The blood, the knocking, the man at the window, all gone. I blinked, disoriented, and found myself in a stark, brightly lit room. Across from me sat a therapist, a calm presence in the clinical surroundings of what I now recognized as a psych ward. "You did great. You're safe now," the therapist reassured me. Their voice was gentle, but the shift from the vivid hallucination to reality was jarring. I was undergoing hypnotherapy, an attempt to piece together fragmented memories of the tragic night I lost my parents. I was too young then to remember faces clearly, but the therapy had triggered a visceral reenactment. The weight of the revelation was crashing. The session had unearthed not just hidden fears, but the raw, unprocessed grief of a child who had never truly understood their loss. Now, surrounded by the sterile walls of the therapy room, the emotional floodgates had opened, and I was left to navigate the stormy waters of a past that had suddenly become all too real. My parents' case, or rather, cases, were never closed. Perhaps these new details will help find who did this. Thanks for tuning in to Past the Pumpkin's Glow. If you found yourself on the edge of your seat, make sure to like, subscribe, and click the bell so you won't miss any of our chilling tales. Dare to share your own spooky experiences in the comments below. Who knows, your story might just be our next creepy highlight. Until next time, keep the lights on and the spirits at bay. Sleep tight.